Okay, I think we're recording.
Okay.
I'll just start. Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Jason Granzotto from the Tri Health Wellness Center, and today we're doing a discussion on the body mass index. I'm joined by our registered holistic nutritionist, Cassandra Niro, and we're going to look into the topic because I think it's something that is worthwhile investigating a bit more. The BMI has been, I guess, staple in the medical system for centuries, really. And there's a growing concern about whether it's still a legitimate tool, even questions about if it was legitimate back in the 1800s when it was created. I'm going to throw it to Cassandra to give some insight, and then we're going to talk a little bit more about it.
Jason, thanks so much for having me on. So it's really interesting. BMI, like you said, has been used for so long, and there's definitely instances where it is accurate and can be used. But for the most part, as we've looked into, it doesn't take into account everything in a person. It doesn't take in their gender. And we know that as women carry a little bit more fat than men do as a natural thing. Doesn't take in waist size, which is a better indicator on whether somebody is at risk for obese-driven disease in the future. Also, it doesn't take in muscle mass and bone density, which is an issue a lot of the times because some people can be a little heavier set bone-wise. And as we know, muscle does gain more than fat.
For sure. I think it's interesting that it was invented in the 1800s by a mathematician. And my view on the index itself is it was probably a really neat and simple tool at a time when no one had calculators. You kind of did like a really quick calculation. You took the person's weight, and typically it's done in kilograms, and you divide it by their height measured in meters squared. And that gives you, like it's a number that we plot on a graph. And let me just call up the standard graph now. So like Cassandra mentioned, this isn't taking into consideration male versus female. And it's not even taking into consideration age. I mean, some people would say, well, people kind of grow at different heights, but this is different. Their height adjusts over time, but it becomes a static measure. So really, you're looking at it. This is a more applicable value for an adult. And as we're going to discuss, if you're, let's say, an average height, let's say 5'8" male, and you weigh anything over 160 pounds, you're overweight. I think that's a bit worrisome, either because there's a huge population of overweight and potentially unhealthy individuals, or this tool is just a little bit outdated. I'm going to show you another interesting clip here. It was a silly little cartoon, but I thought it kind of brings the point to light. So you can see just the abdomen of the average male here from the 1800s is greatly bloated and distended. There's a lot of reasons for this. I mean, some people would say, well, there was a lot of malnourishment in the 1800s. Perhaps, there was a lot of poverty and lack of accessibility to food. But there's probably a change in how we eat and the volumes and the calorie intake. And it would seem that sometime in the 1940s and 1950s, as I'm going to share one more thing, there was a big spike. I mean, even dating back to the 1900s, there was a big spike in the heights of individuals. I mean, this one's measuring men, where the average height, even dating back to when the BMI was created, was approximately 5'4" across European and North American countries, where it is now closer to 5'10". So as height increases, you'd imagine weight also is going to increase. And now are we even looking at the same measure? Are we able to use height and weight as an accurate indicator for health? Cassandra, what would you say about that?
I think there's so much more that goes into health than just someone's height and weight nowadays. Like somebody can rank, say, at a 21 on the BMI scale, making them at a normal range, but then they could be in terms of something called skinny fat, where they do have loads of visceral fat around their organs, or they say are not living a healthy lifestyle and are constantly eating processed foods. They're a little higher calorie than they should be, but they have a fast metabolism that isn't allowing their body to carry on that fat. So due to that, the fact that it's not looking into everything in an individual, I don't think it can be accurate enough to tell us whether somebody's healthy or not, or whether they're at risk for some obesity-driven diseases.
Right. I'm also thinking about I just spinning off from like the skinny fat concept. It's surprising how much more body fat people are starting to carry nowadays, and different tools are able to detect this, and not just, no one is built the same way. So fat distribution can vary, and it varies in different conditions, even in healthy individuals. Some people carry what's called a little bit more visceral fat. Visceral fat is accumulation of fat around their abdominal organs. And this, as it increases, is a much more detrimental score. It's a higher relevance in terms of risk for chronic disease, so whether it's heart disease, cancers, or diabetes, as opposed to someone who has a little bit more of a even distribution of adipose throughout their body. Now, it's hard to say what dictates that. Sometimes it's a genetic disposition. It could be their diet. It could be lack of activity. Uh, but to say just by looking at someone's weight, we're obviously missing the fat category and how it's distributed through the body. So there are other tools that have been used historically, like the caliper test, where often if you go to a gym, the therapist or the trainer there, especially the old school ones, they're much more hands-on. So they are able to detect changes in your body fat and see how your progress is doing with your training based on the actual pinching of the skin folds and measuring fat distribution that way. I think that is actually a step in the direction of what we're discussing, is that a little bit more of a refinement in the body composition and how you are carrying your weight. One of the things I like to highlight, because it's something that we offer here, I'm going to do a screen share again, is the, let me call it up, what do we call the body mass index, or the in-body analysis. Give me 1 second here. I'm not sure if it's coming up here. Okay, I'm going to bring it up this way because it's not seeming to come up. Okay, you're kind of seeing these pictures of some old guys, the BMI inventor. But what I'm looking for is my in-body 570 result sheet PDF. And we'll call it up this way. So this is something that we offer. It is a body composition analyzer where you will stand on a platform, barefooted, and holding onto the arm probes, and a charge or a resistance measure is detected. So it's an indetectable to you, you don't feel anything, but it's going to send a little current through your body and measure what we call resistance, or how fast or slow a current can run through your body systemically from, the bottom of your foot through your hands and out the bottom of the other foot. And what it's able to show us is a distribution of fat mass, the amount of lean muscle you have, water compartmentalization, which is a really interesting measure that we'll probably talk about in another video, because it's great in terms of explaining why someone is carrying a little bit more water, how we can reduce your swelling or your water weight. And this sort of machine is great because it is measuring your composition over time. And at the bottom, you see body composition history, and you can track your progress. Above it, the segmental lean analysis, it's actually telling you where you're carrying your body fat. Is it in the trunk? Is it in your arms? Is it more so in your legs? To the right, you'll see metabolic rate. The basal metabolic rate is a very good score for us in terms of identifying how energetically active or metabolically active your body is. The higher the number, the better you're able to burn calories and the more efficient you are at building muscle, which then results in the burning of fat. Visceral fat is scored underneath. It's a level 12 for the sample, is a problematic score. So we want this under 10 as much as possible. When visceral fat starts to increase, there's an entire cascade of inflammatory markers that are occurring that are what's triggering chronic disease. So when we run this test in our clinic, I'm looking for all those parameters. The test itself does show us your BMI, but that is sort of like just a tip of the iceberg measure. It is useful to have as like a rough gauge, but a test like that I described here it's showing us like, okay, how's your skeletal muscle doing? Where are you carrying your water? Where is your fat distribution? How much muscle do you need to gain? How much body fat should you be losing in order to reach an optimal health profile? And I always encourage individuals, like, let's not focus just on the scale, what the number is there, your overall weight, because as we know, skeletal muscle is more dense. It will show up as a higher score than body fat. And when I start with some a dietary regime, supplemental regime, this scale is the last thing that starts to tip. What the individual usually notices is that they feel better, their clothing fits much better, they are more energetic, the bloating is gone, and people are already commenting like, what are you doing differently? And they may say, you know what, I haven't really lost that much weight. And I think that there's something interesting in that, because sometimes I feel like over time, especially with age, there is some increase in body mass. It's almost like we absorb it from the environment, if you will. There's an attachment to chronic stress where we carry a little bit more weight, and maybe that's a necessary, I won't say evolutionary, but it might be something that we need to compensate for the stresses in our life. So an individual that comes in is like, oh, I want to weigh the same that I weighed when I got married. It's problematic, and I think that's a little bit more of an emotional attachment to a number, as opposed to looking for, where am I going to be healthy? Where am I going to feel good? Where am I going to be comfortable with myself? And I know that I'm in a pro-health state, as opposed to welcoming the potential for disease.
For sure, I totally agree with that. I think a lot of people become fixated on a number, which is why I think BMI isn't always the greatest. But I've had it happen to me with clients as well, where they want to say, yeah, I want to look like what I looked like before my wedding and get down to that weight. But I try to more gear them into the direction of, let's change the lifestyle. Let's get everything working a little bit better. And as that happens, the pounds will go down. We don't make losing weight the main focus, because sometimes changing everything else can be enough to change the weight on the scale.
Sure. I know for myself, one of the key things that has helped my patients in terms of adjusting their BMI or their weight or their overall health is addressing the role of chronic stress. Now, everyone says, yeah, okay, stress, so you can't avoid stress. You can't get rid of your job. You can't get rid of, the people around you for the most part. And why would you say that stress is such an impact on our composition and our chronic health? And the reason I say that is that I focus a lot on adrenal function. And if you don't know what it is, the adrenal gland is it's kind of like our battery pack. It helps us produce energy when we really need it. It encourages our motivation, and it sort of is like a battery that needs to be recharged overnight. I tell everyone, if you don't plug your phone in when you go to bed, when you wake up in the morning, your battery's probably dead by noon. And the adrenal gland is sort of the same thing. Nutrition and good quality sleep is what helps recharge this gland as producing stress hormones that help us function and literally even get up out of bed. If you're having difficulty, staying awake during the day, you're finding that you need a little bit more coffee, you're crashing mid-afternoon, the adrenal gland is probably something that needs to be investigated. And Often, so, sometimes medical doctors will measure cortisol. Cortisol is somewhat of a random measure. If you're going to measure cortisol, we recommend that you do a 4-point test, which is the upon rising, mid-morning, mid-afternoon, and late in the evening. And these are usually either a urinary or saliva test that's sent out to a lab. And this will give you an interesting cortisol curve. That cortisol should be spiking first thing in the morning, because that's when you're waking up and you need a big boost of energy to get your blood pressure up and start to stimulate all the functions that were dormant during your sleep. And then cortisol is supposed to drop off throughout the day on a somewhat linear curve. And then what we're noticing more so is that when people are starting to gain weight and they're starting to feel sluggish and they're feeling suboptimal, the cortisol is bottoming out in the morning. They're not getting a sufficient spike in their cortisol. So they're waking up tired, and they're using stimulants like coffee to keep them up during the day. And hits of sugar here and there. They'll get a little donut and they feel good for an hour, and then they'll get another crash shortly thereafter. And then their weight is increasing because of this, because now there's a little bit more calories coming in and borrowed energy. So their metabolic rate is somewhat dormant. It's shutting down because you're using external sources of energy. And then they're starting to get a secondary rise in their cortisol before bed. And now they're having a hard time falling asleep. Their brain doesn't shut off. They're overstimulated. So the body's got all now this energy that it wants to use. It's not being channeled in the right way in the morning, and now it's like almost like unused and leftover energy that's just stimulating the brain, which then causes your sleep to be disturbed, poor quality sleep, poor adrenal regeneration. You wake up as the cycle keeps on going and over and again. So what I recommend is that we start addressing adrenal function. Now, Cassandra, what in your experience with your clients is one of the things that little tips or tricks that you can offer that will help patients, correct an unhealthy body composition?
So what I often tell people, as I said, is like I like to change the lifestyle more so than just certain things from their diet. I think getting rid of processed foods for the most part is one of the biggest tips I can give someone. I like to get them more on a whole food based diet. A lot of people don't seem to fully understand or grasp how much damage the chemicals in some of these foods can be honestly doing to our whole body, not even just our digestive system, not just our weight, but everything, and how it knocks everything a little bit off balance. And it's interesting that you brought up the point on adrenals and sleep, because as you know, I deal with a lot of people for weight management. And people are often confused when I go into the interviews with them and ask them questions about their sleep, because they think, oh, like we're just talking weight loss. Like, what does this have to do with my sleep? But one of the main questions I do ask is, do you wake up feeling rested? Because that can tell so much about someone's overall health going on inside that we can't necessarily see, that could be having an effect on the way they're losing weight or the fact that they're not losing weight. But yeah, that would be like a main tip for me was, like I said, get off process, start getting better sleep. And to do that, I often give people tips of keeping a journal by their bed, writing some things down before they go to sleep. This way their mind isn't like overthinking throughout the night and they're not having trouble falling asleep. I also get them to get in a fully blacked out room, wear an eye mask, keep the pineal gland blocked sometimes if you have to sleep with a hat on. But little things like that, I think, make a huge difference on a lot of the way things work in the body.
Yeah, I totally agree with all that. The sleep hygiene is so critical,
Huge.
and all the things you've mentioned, there is a strong disconnect with our patients that they do not recognize that these other factors that, I mean, aside from calories in versus calories out, they totally are missing the point in terms of how it's impacting your health, your weight, and your risk of chronic disease. In addition to the sleep hygiene, I like that you mentioned like the processed foods. The more foods the more that they are processed, the more that you move away from a whole foods diet, you are bioaccumulating all these synthetic chemicals. And when a synthetic chemical enters your body through your digestive tract, through your skin, through the air that you breathe, your liver is somewhat equipped to metabolize it and break it down, assuming that you have sufficient liver function. But a lot of the times, these things, these chemicals are actually stored in fat because a lot of them are fat soluble. Most of the synthetic chemicals that are problematic, they are not easily excreted because I mean, we have a urinary system that we can eliminate most water soluble chemicals, and those are a little bit more easy to digest and metabolize. But it's the fat soluble ones, and those are the ones that end up getting bioaccumulated. And the more processed or synthetic chemicals that you possess, you can imagine that your body fat has to increase to compensate for their storage. And that's literally what your body is doing. So if you're noticing that your body fat levels are just increasing, and you're not really understanding the connection, you got to look at the quality of the food that you're having. You may be under eating. This is one of the most common things that people say. It's like, I'm overweight, but I'm having maybe 1,200 calories a day. So one of two things are perhaps happening. One is that their metabolic system, the rate has just bottomed out, whether it's a thyroid, an adrenal gland issue, or they're just not moving. So their metabolism is shut down. The other thing is that you're accumulating these empty calories and this processed and synthetic materials, which your body's just like, I have to dispose of it, but I can't get rid of it. So store it because it's unhealthy and I don't know what to do with it. So they start going into your fat cells. And one of the things that often discourages people, but it actually is probably a good thing, and it's why you need to do weight loss and detoxification under the observation of the practitioner, is that sometimes you can start feeling kind of icky. You can feel nauseous or tired or just off because now you're liberating all these chemicals, and it's really important to make sure that you're keeping hydrated and eating clean as much as possible, having a lot of greens and keeping your diet alkaline, because it will neutralize the effects of this detoxification. So whether it's you're looking at weight loss, the total like the loss of mass, or just changing your composition, the movement of these chemicals in your body it's going to liberate some common feelings. It could be nausea, it could be cravings, it could be mood changes, it could be brain fog. But as long as it's within a healthy range and you're being observed and monitored, you will find that they pass quickly. And then all these old systems that were offline, they start coming back and they start working. You start having a little bit more energy, you start building a little bit more muscle, weight, and your weight adjusts, and your body composition overall, you just feel like you're shrinking, and people are start noticing, and you notice it. So subtle changes like that, we're not always looking at changing your body composition by doing some kind of crash diet or something extreme. Sometimes it's just being disciplined, very, very clean with what you're eating, and minimizing those cheats.
And being able to reset the body's function.
That's
changes
right.
everything.
Right on. Maybe just in conclusion, what I would say for myself is I can appreciate the BMI, where it came from, and why it was established when it was, and it was a very kind of general, quick assessment, and it was fine for the 1800s, the early 1900s. But now the complexity of the human composition seems to be so much more, whether it's environmental stress, overall emotional stress that we carry, this baggage that is accumulating for us. Now we have all these different factors that are affecting our health and our composition. But at the same time, we also have all these new tools and new ways to measure how your body's changing, how your composition needs to be analyzed. And once you have that information, now you can actually be a little bit more targeted with, like, okay, you need this sort of diet, or you need this sort of supplementation, or you should be investigating this sort of lifestyle change, because we have more information. And the BMI on its own is just one little nugget that is somewhat useful, but I wouldn't get fixated on it. I think that's maybe, as a practitioner, that's one of the frustrating things when the patient says, but it says here on the BMI that I'm overweight. I need to drop this much weight. I'm like, sure, but it's more complicated than that. So let's use all the tools that we have available to us just to get you to a point where you are healthy and you're happy and you understand why you need to get there.
For sure, I totally agree with that, because a lot of the more athletic inclined clients I've dealt with, often will bully between overweight and obese and think that they need to lose weight after a test like that tells them something like that. But again, it's not taking into the fact that these people have strong bones, these people have very high muscle mass, and they're still every day following a healthy lifestyle, but they're testing high on this. Again, like you said, it was great and it's definitely a useful tool to look at, but it just shouldn't be everything to look at. Something like the InBody machine that we use at your place, that tells a lot more. And that's often good for even people who are athletic because it will show you maybe you're not going to look at how high your body fat percentage is, but you can look at areas in your body maybe that do need a little bit more work since it does grasp down that deep into areas of the body.
Right on. Okay. Um, so we're going to be posting this on YouTube, and I'm hoping that everyone enjoyed our discussion, and we're going to be doing quite a bit more. And anyone who's local, because this is in Vaughan, Ontario, Canada, if you watch the podcast, feel free to come into our clinic. And if you mention the podcast, we will give you a free body composition analysis, and one of our practitioners will review that with you and discuss the findings, and that's approximately a $50 value. So I think that's a great opportunity, and we welcome everyone to share this video, and look forward to our next one coming out shortly. Thank you, Cassandra.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jason.
All right, we'll talk soon. Bye-bye.
Sounds good. Bye-bye.